March 22nd, 1941. Vågsøy Island, off the wind-scoured coast of Norway, just before dawn. The North Sea breathes heavily against the rocks, each wave a low thunder that seems louder in the cold darkness. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Laycock stands on the deck of a small British destroyer, collar turned up, eyes fixed on the faint outline of shore. Around him, men of No. 3 Commando crouch silently, weapons checked and rechecked. Lee Enfield rifles oiled thin against the cold, Thompson submachine guns slung tight, Fairbairn Sykes knives pressed flat against ribs. No one speaks. You can hear the slap of water against steel, the distant cry of seabirds startled awake. Across Europe, Axis officers still believe raids like this are sideshows, pinpricks, annoyances. In Rome and occupied ports across the Mediterranean, Italian naval officers drink coffee and dismiss British commandos as reckless adventurers, incapable of real damage. Tonight will begin to prove them wrong. But for now, this moment belongs to uncertainty. Laycock glances at his watch, then at the shoreline again. Somewhere beyond those dark shapes are fuel tanks, fish oil factories, radio stations, targets that matter far more than their modest size suggests. Similar confidence exists hundreds of miles south, in Italian-held harbors where sentries trust walls, patrol schedules, and the assumption that the enemy will announce himself with artillery and aircraft. British planners have learned otherwise. Back in London, men like Admiral Roger Keyes have argued relentlessly that small, trained units striking with speed and surprise can unbalance far larger forces. Operation Claymore is one of the first true tests of that belief. As landing craft engines cut to a whisper, a young commando named Corporal James Fraser feels his stomach tighten, not with fear exactly, but with anticipation. He has heard the stories from France, from Dunkirk, from older soldiers who say modern war has become predictable, mechanical. This feels different. This feels personal. Boots scrape wood as men lower themselves into boats, hands numb despite wool gloves. Above them, RAF aircraft circle unseen, ready to strike if the alarm sounds too early. The plan is simple and brutally precise. Land fast, hit hard, vanish before the enemy understands what is happening. On the Italian side of the war, far from this icy coast, officers write reports praising harbor defenses, praising discipline, praising the idea that British soldiers fight by rules. They do not imagine men slipping through darkness with blackened faces and wire cutters. They do not imagine alarms failing to sound until it is far too late. As the first keel grinds softly against rock, Laycock raises his hand, then brings it down. The raid begins. The first shots are not shots at all, but the dull thud of boots on frozen ground and the crack of a crowbar biting into a padlock, the kind of sound no sentry is trained to hear as danger. Corporal Fraser moves inland with his section, breath fogging his face as he counts steps the way he was taught, every movement rehearsed until it feels unreal. A Norwegian dog barks somewhere, then goes quiet. Within minutes, demolition charges are being slid into place at the fish oil tanks, their sharp chemical smell mixing with salt and cold air. When the explosions come, they are violent and sudden, orange fire ripping through the darkness, shockwaves rolling back toward the shore. German guards scramble, some firing wildly, others frozen in disbelief. The raid lasts barely an hour, but it leaves behind burning facilities, destroyed shipping, and something more important, proof. Proof that disciplined men, acting fast, can unhinge an entire defensive system. That lesson does not stay in Norway. Reports race back to London, and from there ripple outward, studied by planners who begin imagining similar strikes against Axis ports farther south. In Italian-controlled harbors across the Mediterranean, confidence still reigns. Italian naval officers pride themselves on tradition and fortification, minefields carefully charted, patrol boats following predictable arcs, coastal guns trained on open water. They expect attack to come with warning, with noise, with weight. Months later, under a moonless sky in the central Mediterranean, that assumption is tested. A small group of British commandos and naval raiders approach an Italian-held harbour in low-profile craft, engines muffled, wakes barely visible. You can almost feel the tension as they pass through gaps in the defences, guided by intelligence gathered at great risk. On shore, Italian sentries stamp their feet against the cold night air, rifles slung, eyes scanning the wrong directions. Somewhere in a nearby command building, an officer finishes a report, noting that British special forces are overrated, their successes exaggerated by propaganda. Then the harbour erupts. Charges detonate against moored vessels, fire climbing masts and rigging in seconds. Machine gun fire rattles across the docks as raiders move with terrifying speed, cutting phone lines, tossing grenades into guard posts before alarms can carry beyond the immediate area. Confusion spreads faster than sound. Orders are shouted, contradicted, lost in smoke. By the time senior officers understand that this is not a drill or an isolated sabotage, key infrastructure is already wrecked. Fuel spills burn on the water's surface, illuminating faces etched with disbelief. Italian sailors fight back bravely, but they are reacting, not controlling. Within minutes, the attackers are already withdrawing, melting back into darkness with prisoners, documents, and the knowledge that they have struck at the heart of complacency. For the men left behind, staring at a harbour in flames, the realization is brutal. The war has changed, and the enemy no longer announces himself. As the fires burn themselves down to blackened hulks and twisted metal, Italian officers move through the ruined harbour in stunned silence, boots crunching on shattered glass and debris, the smell of oil and smoke clinging to uniforms. Captain Lorenzo Bianchi, a career naval officer raised on the doctrines of surface engagements and artillery duels, stops beside a gutted patrol craft and runs a gloved hand along its scorched hull. There is no glory in this damage, no grand exchange of broadsides, only the humiliating evidence that a handful of enemy soldiers slipped in and out almost at will. Reports begin to circulate, confused and contradictory. How many attackers were there? Where did they land? Why did the alarms fail? Subordinates blame faulty wiring, inattentive sentries, bad luck. Quietly, some begin to suspect something worse, that the very structure of their defenses is outdated. In Rome, senior officers read initial summaries with irritation, dismissing the incident as an anomaly, a trick that cannot be repeated. Yet intelligence officers notice patterns. The British are not seeking territory, they are seeking disruption. They hit where defenses are thin, where assumptions are strongest. Training manuals had stressed perimeter strength and visible deterrence, not the unseen vulnerabilities of darkness and routine. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, British commandos analyze their own performance with ruthless honesty. In makeshift briefing rooms, officers sketch harbour layouts, noting which sentries reacted fastest, which routes proved unexpectedly open. The lessons learned in Norway are refined here. Silence is a weapon, speed is armour, confusion is deadlier than firepower alone. Men like Laycock and Keyes push for more resources, more specialised units, arguing that each successful raid forces the Axis to divert thousands of troops to guard against dozens of attackers. You can feel the shift in momentum not in territory gained, but in mindset altered. Back in the Italian harbour, repairs begin almost immediately, but morale lags behind. Sailors speak in low voices about shadows moving along the quay, about the idea that the enemy might already be watching again. Night duty becomes tense, exhausting. Officers issue stricter orders, but discipline born of fear is brittle. Every unexpected sound now carries weight. Far from the docks, Italian High Command debates countermeasures. More patrols, brighter lights, stricter curfews, each solution addressing symptoms rather than cause. They still believe the British will fight the next battle the same way as the last. Yet even as these discussions drag on, another raid is already being planned. Maps are unrolled, targets circled, tides calculated. For the Commandos, this is no longer experimentation. It is doctrine in formation. For the Italians, the harbour is repaired, but the sense of certainty is gone forever. September 1941. The Mediterranean lies unnaturally calm beneath a starless sky, as small British craft slip away from a larger vessel, their silhouettes barely breaking the water's surface. Lieutenant Herbert Blondie Hazler checks his compass by shielded torchlight, then signals his men forward. These are not ordinary infantry. They are commandos and naval raiders trained to move where defenses assume emptiness. Oars dip silently, timed to the swell, each man acutely aware that discovery means annihilation. Ahead lies an Italian-held harbour, considered secure by daylight inspections and paperwork assurances. Onshore, sentries pace familiar routes, trusting routine as a substitute for vigilance. Inside the harbour, moored ships rest in neat rows, fuel barges tied fast, cranes looming like sleeping giants. The plan unfolds with clinical precision. Swimmers slip into the water, cold biting through wool and rubber, attaching limpet mines to hulls with steady hands. Others move inland, cutting communications lines and disabling searchlights before they can sweep the bay. When the first explosion hits, it is low and muffled, a shock felt more than heard. Seconds later, another detonates, then another, tearing open hulls and igniting fuel. Flames leap skyward, reflected in water suddenly alive with debris and burning oil. Italian sailors scramble from quarters, some diving overboard to escape the heat, others racing to gun positions that have no clear targets. Officers shout orders that collide and cancel each other out in the chaos. The attackers are already withdrawing, leaving destruction to speak for itself. By the time coherent resistance forms, the raiders are gone, swallowed by darkness and distance. At dawn, the harbour is unrecognizable. Ships sunk at their moorings, piers damaged, critical supplies destroyed. Italian commanders walk the docks in disbelief, forced to confront a reality they can no longer deny. Small, determined units have undone defences built to repel fleets. The psychological blow cuts deeper than the material loss. Every harbour, every anchorage now feels vulnerable. British special operations have proven they can choose the time, the place, and the manner of attack. As smoke drifts out to sea, a new kind of warfare has announced itself, and it will not be ignored again. In the days following the raid, Italian command rooms fill with maps spread flat and ashtrays overflowing, the air thick with smoke and frustration. Admirals and colonels argue late into the night, voices rising and falling as reports arrive from the harbour, lists of sunk tonnage, damaged infrastructure, wounded sailors. Rear Admiral Vittorio Tour, his uniform immaculate despite the chaos, listens in silence as junior officers explain how alarms failed to propagate, how patrols never sighted the attackers until the water itself seemed to explode. He asks the same question again and again, quietly at first, then sharper. Where were the men? Where were the boats? Where was the warning? No one has a satisfying answer. Outside, repairs continue under armed guard, floodlights blazing as if brightness alone can banish uncertainty. Sentries double, then triple, their nerves frayed by every ripple and shadow. Yet the measures feel performative, reactive. Across the sea, British commandos are already reviewing photographs taken at dawn, noting which charges achieved maximum effect and which moments risked exposure. Training intensifies, selection tightens. The ethos hardens, hit fast, vanish faster. For Italian officers raised on the primacy of mass and maneuver, this is a conceptual defeat as much as a tactical one. Their doctrines emphasize control of space. The enemy has learned to exploit time. Intelligence officers begin to warn that more raids are likely, that ports once deemed secondary are now prime targets precisely because they are overlooked. Some senior figures resist, unwilling to concede that elite raiders can dictate strategy. But the evidence accumulates. Insurance rates climb. Convoys alter schedules. Resources are diverted to guard against threats that may never materialize, stretching manpower thin. Sailors whisper about British ghosts, about men who come at night and leave fires behind. The psychological tax mounts. Meanwhile, London's planners see confirmation of a theory long argued, that special operations can magnify limited resources into outsized effects. Each successful strike forces the Axis to spend more to defend than the British spend to attack. You can feel the balance shift not on maps of territory, but in ledgers and sleep-deprived faces. For the Italians, the reckoning is slow and painful. Pride gives way to grudging respect, then to fear. Training manuals are revised, countermeasures proposed, nets, booms, irregular patrols, but implementation lags behind the pace of events. The war is accelerating into a realm where initiative belongs to those willing to embrace risk. As another night falls over the Mediterranean, lights dim and guns stand ready, but confidence has drained away. Somewhere beyond the horizon, small boats are already being prepared, their crews memorizing routes and tides, carrying with them the quiet certainty that surprise remains their greatest ally. October 1941. In an Italian-held port farther east, the atmosphere has changed, though not enough. New barriers float at harbour mouths, and additional sentries patrol the docks, their boots echoing in the night air. On paper, defences look formidable. In reality, they are predictable. British reconnaissance has already noted patrol rhythms, blind angles, the moments when vigilance fades just before dawn. A young Italian lieutenant, Enzo Marini, walks his assigned sector with growing unease. He has read the reports, seen the photographs, and knows the stories whispered among sailors are not exaggerations. Yet his superiors insist that this port, unlike the others, is ready. Far out at sea, a British submarine surfaces briefly to release a pair of collapsible canoes. The men inside paddle toward shore, muscles burning, minds focused on landmarks memorized weeks earlier. They bypass the main entrance entirely, slipping through shallows assumed impassable. On shore, they pause, listening only wind and water. Wind charges are placed with the calm efficiency of men who have done this before. When the first blast tears through a fuel depot, Lieutenant Marini feels it in his chest before he hears it. Alarms wail, but too late and without clarity. Searchlights snap on, sweeping empty water. Machine guns chatter at imagined targets. Within minutes, secondary explosions ripple through the harbour, each one hammering home the same lesson. Italian units respond with courage, but confusion reigns. Orders overlap, radios crackle uselessly, and the attackers fade away as suddenly as they arrived. At dawn, Marini stands among the wreckage, staring at the waterline where the enemy escaped. He realizes, with a sinking feeling, that this war is no longer about holding ground. It is about anticipating intent. For the Italians, adaptation is coming, but it is arriving one painful lesson at a time. By November 1941, the fear has become institutional. Italian naval bases across the Mediterranean hum with activity even in daylight, yet nights are ruled by tension. Floodlights glare across water that once lay dark, turning harbours into exposed stages, but the brightness only sharpens shadows rather than banishing them. Sailors flinch at drifting debris, officers snap at subordinates, and every unexplained sound is treated as the possible beginning of another disaster. Lieutenant Enzo Marini is reassigned inland, his superiors quietly acknowledging that the problem is no longer individual vigilance, but systemic vulnerability. In Rome, staff officers brief Mussolini's inner circle with carefully chosen words, avoiding the implication that elite British units are dictating the tempo of operations. But the truth leaks through in requisition orders for more patrol boats, more barriers, more men, resources pulled from already strained fronts. Across the sea, British commanders sense the pressure working. Each raid forces the Italians to spread thinner, to defend everywhere while attacking nowhere. Training camps in Britain and the Middle East refined techniques born in these early operations: night navigation without lights, silent killing, demolition under fire. Veterans pass down hard-earned instincts to new recruits, stressing that the greatest danger comes after success, when confidence tempts carelessness. You can feel the war's shape changing. For Italian officers, the night has become the enemy, a time when rank and routine offer little protection. For the commandos, darkness is cover, opportunity, and weapon. As winter approaches, the Mediterranean grows rougher, but raids continue when weather permits, each one reinforcing the same lesson. The British are no longer merely reacting to Axis moves, they are shaping them. And deep within Italian command structures, a reluctant realization settles in. The age of secure rear areas is over. December 1941 brings colder nights and harder seas, and with them a flurry of Italian countermeasures that look decisive on briefing charts but falter in practice. Steel nets are stretched across harbour mouths, patrol schedules randomised, dogs introduced along quays, and overlapping fields of fire plotted with mathematical care. Instructors lecture sentries on vigilance, on the danger of routine, on the enemy's preference for silence. Yet the very effort to guard everything introduces new seams. Fatigue dulls senses, coordination strains under complexity, and men learn to trust procedures over instincts. At one fortified port, an Italian major insists on a full blackout to deny attackers visual cues, unaware that the darkness favours those trained to navigate by sound and feel. Offshore, British planners study these adaptations with interest, adjusting approaches, choosing secondary targets, exploiting the human element rather than the hardware. A raid that night does not aim to destroy ships, but to sever cables, to sabotage pumps, to leave behind uncertainty disproportionate to the damage inflicted. The result is the same. Alarms blare without clear cause, guns fire into emptiness, and at dawn, officers confront failures they cannot easily explain. The cumulative effect spreads beyond the docks. Insurance and logistics planners alter routes. Convoy commanders hesitate. Schedules slip. Italian crews begin sleeping in bursts, nerves taut, tempers short. Meanwhile, Allied command recognizes a compounding advantage. Every defensive improvement costs the Axis time and manpower that cannot be spared. The Mediterranean, once imagined as a controlled basin, becomes a contested web of vulnerabilities. For the Italians, countermeasures are necessary but insufficient. For the commandos, consequences are the objective. The night belongs to those who decide where it matters. Early 1942. In an Italian naval headquarters overlooking a battered harbour, the mood has shifted from anger to resignation, edged with determination. Captain Lorenzo Bianchi, older now, studies a wall map marked with pins and grease pencil arcs, denoting patrol zones that have grown dense to the point of overlap. He listens as an intelligence officer briefs him on yet another suspected landing, false alarm this time perhaps, but Bianchi no longer dismisses the possibility. He has learned, the hard way, that absence of evidence means nothing in a war where silence is the weapon. Outside, sailors repair nets and test lights with the ritual seriousness of men who know mistakes are fatal. There is talk of adopting similar methods, of forming Italian special units trained for night work and sabotage, a tacit admission that the British have forced a change not just in tactics, but in philosophy. Meanwhile, British commandos prepare for their next mission with a confidence tempered by losses and close calls. In a dimly lit hut, an officer traces a shoreline with his finger, reminding his men that success depends on leaving no trace except confusion. You can sense the symmetry forming, the hunted studying the hunter, the defender becoming student. The war has entered a phase where innovation begets imitation, and complacency invites ruin. For the Italians, acceptance does not mean surrender. It means acknowledging that the enemy's strength lies in initiative and imagination. For the British, it confirms that small forces used boldly can rewrite assumptions held by entire navies. As night falls again over the Mediterranean, both sides wait. One side for the moment to strike, the other for the sound that signals it is already too late. By mid-1942, the lesson has settled deep into the fabric of the war. Italian harbours still function, ships still sail, guns still point seaward, but the old certainty is gone forever. Every defence plan now carries an unspoken acknowledgement that walls and numbers alone are no longer enough. Captain Bianchi stands on a quay at dusk, watching patrol boats depart on overlapping routes, their engines echoing against stone. He understands now what he once dismissed, that a handful of determined men, properly trained and willing to accept extreme risk, can achieve what entire divisions cannot. Across the Allied world, the implications ripple outward. British Special Operations doctrine expands, influencing the formation of new units, new tactics, new ways of thinking about warfare. The raids against Italian-held ports become case studies, cited not for the tonnage destroyed but for the reaction they provoked. How entire command structures were forced to adapt, divert, and rethink. For the commandos who took part, the memories remain visceral. The cold water, the whispered signals, the brief, violent clarity of action followed by long hours of withdrawal and waiting. Some will not survive future missions. Others will carry the lessons learned here to new theatres, from North Africa to occupied Europe. For Italian officers, the experience leaves a different mark. Pride gives way to realism, and realism to reform. Units dedicated to unconventional warfare begin to form, born directly from the humiliation of being outmaneuvered by shadows. History will remember these nights not as isolated acts of sabotage, but as moments when the nature of modern war revealed itself. The harbour raids proved that dominance could be challenged without fleets, that initiative could outweigh mass, and that underestimating an enemy's adaptability invites disaster. Long after the fires are extinguished and the docks rebuilt, the memory lingers of a war where the most dangerous blows came not with thunder but with silence.